I'm Jeremy. I did my service learning at the Enterprise Resource Center. It's a mental health drop-in center in the Canal. It's a place where people can come in carrying everything: homelessness, trauma, addiction, mental illness, grief. There's really no filter. It's real. It's raw. It's where I needed to be. It was soul led to do this work and have this class at the same time. And so in this class that I took, it was ethics from the margins. We talked about a lot of core concepts. The ones I pulled for today: positionality, listening, structural injustice, intersectionality, and then rational justice. The lens I walked in with. I walked into the center thinking, hey, I got this. I had lots of training. I had lots of experience. This is a peer-run job. It's based off experience. So I thought I got this. I lived through instability, extreme trauma, homelessness, struggles with racial identity and mental illness. I've been on the margins. I've had to survive things that I don't really like to talk about, but quickly realized that my story was not the map for their story. It was just a reminder that I needed to shut up and listen before assuming I understood anything. And that was taught to me pretty early. Listening is not passive, it's power sharing. And that was one of the first things I learned. My work isn't to fix anyone. Half the time, the most important thing I did and do is just sit with someone while the world is actually falling apart, which is it's kind of hard to be quiet in those moments. There was a moment where somebody's life was falling apart, and I had some resources that I wanted to share, and this person didn't want them. They ended up yelling at me. I don't need advice. Shut the F up. I just need someone who sees me and who will listen, which was like a clear reminder. This is what the person needs. It's not about what I think. And so that's what I did. I just shut up. I listened to them. I held their space, and they actually came up with their own solutions. Another time where listening was power. I'm crisis trained. Another peer is not. They were having a hard time knowing how to be with a client who was actively suicidal and didn't want to live. This was a sweet little old lady that smiled and was nice to everybody, and she was covering her pain. And I ended up sitting on the floor next to her for 4 hours, listening to her story, what was going on. And in the end, we went from active suicide ideation and pretty imminent to driving her to the emergency room in the crisis stabilization unit. So that's how listening can be power. It redistributes the power. It says your reality matters enough for me to stop and hear it. And that's what keeps a lot of people going. Structural injustice. In class, we broke down how oppression works through patterns, people getting stripped of power, punished for not fitting expectations, people treated as problems, and then otherizing over a zero-sum mentality. And I got to see that live hand. I've been in the room with people who were told they lost their shelter bed. They're living in a homeless shelter, so they have nowhere else to go but the shelter. And because of a trauma response, which was seen as non-compliant, but it was an actual response that could not be helped unless it was worked with, this person was kicked out of the shelter and put back on the streets. That's someone with a disability getting punished instead of being supported. Police are called on homeless people. I work with the homeless population. Somebody sleeping out in the public, when somebody's having a mental health crisis in public, when the dominant culture feels uncomfortable with seeing someone suffering, they end up getting criminalized instead of getting help. I wondered, are people seeing these symptoms as choices rather than symptoms and being labeled as bad behavior? And it's never just one thing. Intersectionality, homelessness and mental illness, trauma, poverty, isolation, disability, overwhelm, and no support. People come in with a lot of things that are affecting and impacting their lives, and there's no one thing. And so you just kind of have to listen and figure out what's the most imminent, what's getting in their way of their success right now, and how do I help by listening and offering what I can. I noticed the narratives. A narrative is a weapon that's used in this structural injustice. People talk about homelessness as it's a moral failure. They give up. They don't care. They're just drug users. They don't want a job. I had a lengthy discussion with a very wealthy person who is a possible funder. And I was telling them about the work I'm doing with the unhoused. And they were like, well, isn't it? I mean, people just really not want the help. That's a narrative that's sold by cities and police officers that, the homeless people don't want help. They just want to be out there. And I explained to him, when a police officer actually asks a person on the street, would you like me to help you find a shelter bed. Would you like off the street? What that really means is that officer is then going to spend the following Monday making a phone call to a homeless shelter to ask if there's a bed. That is it. That is all they are doing. And so after somebody gets their hopes up about possibly getting a shelter over and over and over and over again, they say no the next time a cop asks, do you want help finding a shelter? And now they're labeled service resistant. And that's where the narratives begin. And that's where people are able to attack, otherize people who are experiencing homelessness in a way that they're taking an individual with their problems and spreading it across the entire spectrum, which we all know isn't true. Relational justice, where change actually happens. In the ERC specifically, we are peer-led and peer-run. So there is no hierarchy. There's no expert. There's no client. We're just people sitting with other people who are going through a hard time. We're equals. And so the healing happens in the relationship. It doesn't happen in the policy or whatever. It's the relationship that the peers bring to those that are suffering. Something I ran into is the systems of help and the systems of care that these people have been falling through, in which I am now supposed to navigate and work to help. And systems don't change easily. It became about how to understand the language almost of the oppressor to then help the people being oppressed within their own confines and work. And that became where I put my focus. The person that was kicked out of the shelter, I got them into another treatment facility. I had to negotiate, work some relationships, and found this person a bed inside. Now they're doing well. The woman who was in crisis, I visited her last night actually at Unit A, and she's getting the help she needs, and she is improving. So the biggest thing that I learned, service is not what you do. Service is how you show up every day. And justice is not about correcting wrongs. Justice is about correcting the wrongs within the systems so that people don't continue to get hurt or fall through the cracks. And so that's been my experience.